Have you ever gotten too close to someone you weren't supposed to? Not because it was wrong, but because it made everything harder to forget. This summer was meant to be simple, but the quiet between them said everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thanks so much for watching. The last day of finals emptied the campus like a sudden tide. One by one, dorm doors slammed, echoing down the halls. People disappeared behind suitcases and parents' cars. Sandra stayed. She had told people she was helping with research, and that was true. Professor Michelle Hale needed assistance sorting and digitizing 10 years of qualitative interviews for a grant submission. But the part Sandra didn't say out loud was this. She didn't want to leave yet. Not quite. The sociology building was mostly dark now, save for the top floor. The heat of early summer crept in through open windows. The clack of keyboards and the occasional hum of the old scanner broke the silence. Michelle sat across the room, her reading glasses sliding halfway down her nose as she marked up a transcript. Her blouse sleeves were rolled to her elbows, collarbone visible just above the buttons. A strand of hair had slipped from her bun, curling softly near her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear without looking up. Sandra was supposed to be organizing interviews by year. Instead, she watched the way Michelle's fingers paused mid-sentence, how she pressed the cap back on a pen with a small, thoughtful frown. Liam wandered in briefly, grabbed a stack of folders, and left with a half-hearted wave. "See you tomorrow, Sandra," he said on his way out. "Yep." Then they were alone again. Michelle stood and stretched, fingers laced above her head. Her blouse rose just slightly at the hem, revealing a glimpse of pale skin before settling back down. Sandra looked away, clearing her throat as she focused on the screen in front of her. "You've done a lot today," Michelle said, walking over with a mug in hand. "Let me make you a tea. You'll burn out before the week's over." "I'm fine," Sandra said, smiling. "But I won't say no." She followed Michelle into the faculty lounge, where the old electric kettle buzzed to life. Outside, golden light spilled across the quad, washing the building's stone arches in soft orange. Michelle leaned against the counter while the water heated. "I'm not used to company in the summer. It's quieter than I remember." "I kind of like it," Sandra said. "No noise, no lines at the coffee shop. It's like the whole place is holding its breath." Michelle looked at her, then looked away quickly, like the words had struck closer than she expected. They brought their mugs to the large reading room. Sandra sat on the low couch by the window, folding her legs beneath her. Michelle sat beside her, leaving a small but noticeable gap. The tea was hot and too strong, but Sandra didn't care. "You didn't have to stay behind, you know," Michelle said. Sandra took a slow sip. "I know." "Then why did you?" Sandra hesitated. The hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence. "I just didn't feel done here." Michelle didn't speak. Her gaze rested on Sandra's face, steady and unreadable. A gust of wind pushed the curtains inward, brushing Sandra's shoulder. She caught the faint scent of Michelle's perfume, something crisp and warm, like bergamot and cedar. "You're very good at this," Michelle said quietly. "You're quick, thoughtful. You notice details others miss." Sandra's chest tightened. "Thank you. That means a lot." The air shifted again, just slightly. Michelle leaned forward to place her mug on the table. As she turned back, Sandra didn't move. Their knees touched, not an accident. Neither pulled away. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Michelle said, barely above a whisper, "Tell me if I'm wrong." She didn't wait for a reply. Her hand found Sandra's cheek, gentle, deliberate. Sandra leaned into the warmth of it, eyes fluttering shut. Michelle's lips met hers, slow and tentative. It wasn't a dramatic kiss, not rushed or cinematic. Her mouth was soft, her breath warm. Sandra tilted her head slightly, responding with quiet need, her hand rising to Michelle's waist. They kissed again, longer this time. The space between them disappeared, bodies angled toward each other, Michelle's fingers brushing along Sandra's jaw like she wasn't sure she'd be allowed to stay. When they pulled back, it was only a few inches. Michelle exhaled and pressed her forehead lightly to Sandra's. "I shouldn't have." "I know," Sandra whispered, "but I'm glad you did." They sat like that for a moment, touching, quiet. Eventually, Michelle stood. "We should get back to work. Just a little more before we call it." Sandra nodded. Her hands felt warm where they'd touched Michelle's shirt. Back at the desks, everything looked the same. The notes, the folders, the late light stretching across the floor. But something between them had changed. Subtle, invisible, unmistakable. Michelle didn't mention the kiss again. Neither did Sandra. But as they worked in silence, their shoulders nearly brushing, the quiet between them no longer felt empty. It felt full. By the next morning, the reading room felt different. Sandra arrived early, but Michelle was already there. Sleeves rolled, hair still damp from a shower, eyes fixed on her screen. She looked up when Sandra entered. No smile, but her mouth softened. That was enough. "Morning," Sandra said, setting down her backpack. Michelle gestured toward the stack of folders. "We're almost through year 8. After that, it's just the consent forms and a few outliers. If we're lucky, we'll finish by Thursday." Sandra nodded. They moved through the day quietly, typing, labeling, scanning, like the kiss had folded itself into the room and made a place there, unnamed but present. When Michelle handed Sandra a flash drive, their fingers brushed again. They both paused. Not long. Not enough to call attention. But it happened. They didn't talk about it. Jess texted Sandra during lunch. "Jess, you still alive or have you become a permanent resident of room 304? Sandra, still breathing. Just buried in transcripts. Jess. Transcript girl, huh? That's what we're calling her now? Sandra smiled, thumb hovering over the keyboard, then put her phone away. That afternoon, the weather turned. A summer storm rolled in out of nowhere, thick clouds swallowing the sunlight, distant thunder cracking behind the hills. By the time Sandra looked up from her monitor, rain streaked the windows in noisy, diagonal lines. "I think we're trapped," she said. Michelle glanced up. "Welcome to June." She stood and crossed the room, unplugging a lamp and lighting a candle instead. Cinnamon and cedar, tucked into a chipped ceramic jar. Its glow spread across the bookshelves. "Power goes out sometimes," Michelle explained. "Old wiring." Sandra walked to the window. The campus outside was a blur of slate rooftops and swaying branches. No students, no cars, no sound beyond wind and water. "It's kind of beautiful," she said. Michelle joined her. They stood side by side, shoulders just apart. "Storms used to scare me," Michelle said. "Now I find them comforting, like a reason to stop for a while." Sandra tilted her head toward her. "You don't seem like someone who stops often." "I used to," Michelle said. Then, after a pause, "A long time ago." The quiet filled in again. Thicker now, warmer. Sandra turned to her. "Is that why you started teaching, to slow down?" Michelle hesitated. "No. I started because I thought I had something to say, but lately it's harder to tell if anyone's listening. I am." That was all she said. She didn't push the words. She just let them settle. Michelle looked at her fully then. No filter, no effort to hide the way her expression shifted. Sandra stepped closer. A little. Just enough. Michelle didn't move. The candlelight flickered between them. When Sandra leaned in, it wasn't bold. It wasn't planned. It was gentle, careful. A question shaped like a kiss. Michelle met her halfway. Their lips met again, softer this time, like they were both remembering how to do it. Michelle's hand found Sandra's forearm, light but grounding. Sandra's fingers curled around the edge of the windowsill as their bodies shifted closer. There was no urgency, just that slow hum of tension loosening in their chests. When they parted, their foreheads stayed close. "I thought maybe we'd pretend it didn't happen," Michelle said. "I tried," Sandra said. "But then you lit a candle." That made Michelle laugh under her breath, brief and breathless. "So it's my fault then." "A little." They stood there a while longer. Neither said what it meant. The next day, Michelle brought in lunch from the cafe near the campus entrance. 2 sandwiches, a container of watermelon cubes, and ginger tea. They sat on the floor of the records room, folders stacked like barricades around them. Sandra brushed a watermelon seed from her chin, and Michelle reached out to catch it before it fell. It was such a small gesture, but something in the way her fingers lingered, thumb brushing Sandra's jaw, made them both pause. "Is this dangerous?" Sandra asked, her voice low, not accusing, just open. Michelle looked at the wall before answering. "Only if we pretend it's not happening." They didn't talk about it again for the rest of the afternoon. Later that evening, Liam walked by the office and saw them packing up. "Still here? You two are machines," he said, tossing his empty coffee cup into the bin. "I'm off. Don't work too hard." Sandra smiled. Michelle nodded politely. The hallway emptied again. On the way out, they paused near the main staircase. The overhead lights buzzed faintly above them. Michelle reached for the switch to the archives room, hesitating. "Do you want to lock up?" she asked. Sandra glanced toward the door, then back at her. "Stay 5 more minutes?" Michelle didn't answer right away, but she let go of the switch. They ended the day seated on the edge of the long wooden table, half lit by the remaining daylight. Michelle sipped from the last of her tea. Sandra leaned back on her hands, looking up at the faded ceiling tiles. "Why are the quiet moments the ones I'll remember?" Sandra asked. Michelle set down her mug. "Because that's when everything speaks louder." Sandra turned her head. Michelle was already looking at her. They leaned in again, slower than before. This time there was no hesitation, no flicker of uncertainty. The kiss was deeper, warmer, more like recognition than discovery. Michelle's hand slid into Sandra's hair. Sandra's fingers found the curve of Michelle's shoulder. It didn't last long. But when they pulled away, there was no question left between them. They stood quietly, then gathered their bags. No need to explain. Outside, the sky was clear again, and the last of the storm's water clung to the grass. Sandra walked home barefoot, shoes in hand, the imprint of Michelle's lips still tingling against hers. The last Friday of the summer term was warm enough to keep the windows open, but the kind of warm that stuck to the skin and made every movement feel slower, deliberate. Sandra arrived at the department building before sunset. The air in the hallway held that familiar quiet, the kind that meant most of campus had emptied for the weekend. She passed a poster for the spring sociology conference, still taped to the bulletin board, curling at the edges. Michelle was already in the main room, sorting the last stack of survey transcripts. A portable fan rattled in the corner, barely moving the heat. "I brought us iced tea," Sandra said, setting the bottle on the table. Michelle glanced over, smiling faintly. "You're too good to me. I'm just trying to make up for Year 9's terrible file labeling." Michelle gave a tired laugh. "Don't remind me." They worked for an hour more, but it didn't feel like work. It was the rhythm they'd fallen into, familiar, almost quiet in its closeness. At one point, their chairs were side by side, knees brushing under the table. Neither of them moved. When they finished, Michelle leaned back, stretching slowly. "That's it. Everything's uploaded, archived, backed up twice." Sandra looked at the glowing screen, then at her. So we're done. Michelle nodded. We are. They didn't say anything for a moment. The word done echoed a little too loud. I think I'll miss this, Sandra said. Even the terrible desk chairs. Michelle didn't reply, not right away. Then she stood. Come with me. They walked through the building in silence. The hallway lights flickered to life as they passed. Michelle unlocked the side door to the courtyard, a small, half-forgotten space behind the east wing, where string lights still hung from an old student festival. Some had burned out, but a few still glowed a soft yellow. They stepped outside. The air was thicker now, full of summer and something else. I used to come here between lectures, Michelle said. Back when I thought I'd only teach for a few years. Sandra looked at her. And now? Michelle smiled without humor. Now I don't know who I'd be without it. They sat on the low brick wall at the edge of the courtyard. Cicadas buzzed in the trees above, and the scent of cut grass lingered in the air. Sandra ran her thumb along the edge of her cup. I leave Sunday. I know. I keep trying to decide if this was a beginning or just a moment. Michelle's eyes flicked up at her, then back down. Do you need it to be one or the other? Sandra shook her head. No, I just want it to be real. They were quiet again. When Sandra reached out and placed her hand over Michelle's, Michelle didn't pull away. I've never done this before, Michelle said softly. Not with someone I was supposed to keep at arm's length. You didn't, Sandra said. You let me close. Michelle turned her hand over beneath Sandra's, their fingers slipping together. You're young, she said. You still have time to figure out what you want. Sandra leaned in, their foreheads nearly touching. I'm not confused. Michelle closed her eyes for a second, then let out a breath and kissed her. It was slower this time, deeper, not the careful kind they'd shared before. There was no uncertainty left in it. Michelle's hand moved to Sandra's neck, thumb brushing the skin just below her ear. Sandra shifted closer, legs touching, her own hand resting on Michelle's waist. The kiss stretched out, not rushed, not timid, just full of everything neither had said during the long afternoons and quiet nights. When they pulled apart, Michelle looked down, then up again. This changes things. It doesn't have to, Sandra said. Not in the way you're thinking. Michelle searched her face, something unreadable in her expression. You're leaving. I know. And I have to keep doing what I do here. Sandra nodded. Then let's not pretend it didn't matter just because it can't stay exactly like this. Michelle smiled, small and tired, and full of something that looked a lot like gratitude. They stayed in the courtyard until the lights dimmed. Eventually, Michelle stood. Walk you out? Sandra shook her head. Not yet. So they sat again, fingers loosely intertwined, until the crickets started and the sky turned the color of ash. The next morning, Sandra packed her last box. Jess helped shove it into the trunk of the rented car. You look like someone who spent the night thinking too much, Jess said, leaning on the passenger side. I slept fine, Sandra lied. Jess didn't push. Michelle didn't come to say goodbye. Sandra hadn't expected her to. But when she reached into her tote bag for her charger, she found a small envelope tucked between her folders. Inside was a note, handwritten on campus letterhead. Some things don't need to be finished, just remembered. No name, just the scent of tea and ink still clinging to the paper. A month later, in her grad school apartment, Sandra opened her laptop for the first class of the semester. New city, new classmates, same strange ache in her chest when the afternoon light hits the desk just right. She pulled up the research files she'd archived that summer. Her name was listed on the project notes now. Research Assistant, Sandra Reyes. She smiled. Somewhere, Michelle would open the same folders, and Sandra hoped she'd think of her, just for a moment, before clicking away.